Hi everyone, it's Laura from Eastward and I've put together the survival guide for teaching punctuation to help you in whatever year group you are working in. Now you know that there's probably situations that you've come up against where maybe your subject knowledge is not as strong as you would hoped. So hopefully by going through this survival guide, if ever you need to refer back to it to learn about something, you'll be able to do so with ease and it'll increase your confidence when working in any year group. So, punctuation is the marks such as a full stop, comma and brackets used in writing to separate sentences and their elements to clarify meaning. And that's something that you'll see comes up quite a lot throughout this. It's all about teaching children how to clarify meaning within their writing and also understanding how the punctuation in books and texts that they read help to do that as well. So what does it look like in the early years? Children use their phonic knowledge to write words in ways which match their spoken sounds. They also write some irregular common words. They write simple sentences which can be read by themselves and others. Some words are spelt correctly and others are phonetically plausible. So for any child who meets the expectation by the end of early years, they will be able to do all of these things. Now, in early years, the teachers will introduce children to capital letters, full stops and finger spaces, but you may still find that children are not quite confident with this when they move to Key Stage 1, but this is where the punctuation all begins. So let's move on to Key Stage 1. So what is taught in Key Stage 1? So in Year 1, this is what is taught. They will learn about the separation of words using spaces, which you would hope would have come before in early years. So now it's just really building upon their existing knowledge. They will learn about capital letters for names and for personal pronouns, full stops, question marks and exclamation marks. So these are the elements of the curriculum that are taught in Year 1. So we all know that a personal pronoun are I, me, you, he, him, she, her, it, we, us, they, or them, and most of them are used in place of nouns that refer to people. So here's an example of a Year 1 question a child may come up against. So write the punctuation to complete the sentence. So you know that the children need to be taught this properly to be able to answer a question like this in a grammar lesson. So what punctuation needs to go at the end of each sentence? So have a moment to think. Okay, so in Year 1, when thinking about question marks, it will be, does the sentence use question words and is it asking for an answer? So obviously number 1 and number 4 are the questions. Look at that boy could be an exclamation mark. The pigeon is in the tree, full stop. It's a statement. Hi, I am going to school, full stop. So in Year 2, these are the only new elements that the children will learn. So an apostrophe and a comma. So when we're thinking about punctuation, there's nothing new taught in Year 2 except for apostrophe and comma. And then they will also continue to build upon what they have learnt in Year 1 with the hope that obviously by the time they leave Key Stage 1, they are confident at using all those elements of punctuation. So when can an apostrophe be used? So it can be used for a contraction, so linking two words, so do not becomes don't, and it can be used for possession. So when the coat belongs to the girl, it becomes the girl's coat. And possession when the apostrophe comes at the end of the word, so in plural nouns and names ending in S. So there's just some examples. So just teaching the children the different ways in which apostrophes can be used. Now generally you would be looking at the contraction, the linking of two words, and the apostrophe when something belongs to someone for possession, where the word doesn't end in S in Year 2. You will touch upon this, but these are the general rules you'll be looking at. So here's some examples. So the apostrophe to mark where the letters are missing. So have a think about the different contractions that will be taught. If you were expecting children to write formally, you wouldn't expect them to be writing contractions. So just remember that as well when you're working with children. You would be saying to them it's has not hasn't. And then there's apostrophe for single possession. So if a person, place or thing owns something, all you have to do is add on an apostrophe S. So the book belonging to the girl is the girl's book. The cat belonging to the boy would be the boy's cat. And the bone belonging to the dog would be the dog's bone. So if you want to know a bit more, there's a link here that you can click on to help you to understand how you would be teaching it to children. So here is the next element is a comma, and we would teach children in year 2 to use commas to separate items in a list. So label the commas, full stops in the sentence. So here is the examples. On our holiday we saw cows, comma, pigs, comma, dogs and sheep. So you would be encouraging children and teaching them to replace the word and generally with a comma in year 2. And here we can see an example of how these different elements that are taught in Key Stage 1 then appear on the end of Key Stage 1 assessment for grammar, punctuation and spelling. So just because it was taught in year 1 doesn't mean it's not going to come up on this test. It's all of the elements from Key Stage 1 that are assessed at the end of year 2. So here's some examples from the grammar test. So what is needed in the sentence below? So you would be expecting that children would be able to look at that sentence and they will know what's missing, tick 1. Putting in the correct punctuation, so tick the sentence with the correct punctuation, this one at the end, and then here, which sentence is a question. So actually the first 2 are questions where the teaching aspect of it is being taught in year 1, and it is only this last one that actually the content has been taught in year 2. So that's why it's so important that these things are taught when they need to be taught, so that then in year 2 teachers can build upon the knowledge that the children already have. You can also see that contracted form is something that comes up in a Key Stage 2 SAT test, but actually it's taught in year 2. So just because again the end of Key Stage 2 tests are taught in year 6, actually a lot of the content comes even from Key Stage 1. So if they're not taught properly, then they can't be built upon and the children won't have the knowledge embedded that they need to be able to meet the expected standard by the end of year 6. So write the contracted form for the underlined words in the box below is a year 6 question, but actually the content was taught in year 2. So when we move on to Key Stage 2, what will we see being taught when? So in year 3, the only extra thing that is taught is inverted commas, and you would still be looking at the teachers going over these different aspects of punctuation that are taught in year 1 and year 2. So we're looking at speech marks for direct speech. So here is an example. Clean the floor, Cinderella, the wicked stepmother told her. And why haven't you polished my shoes yet? Asked one of her stepsisters. Now we can see in year 4, inverted commas is also taught here. But in year 3, it was only an introduction to that. So you need to make sure that although the children will be learning it, it will be taught in year 3, actually it's in year 4 where you would be expecting them to use it properly. So yes, in year 4 we have inverted commas, use of other punctuation after reporting clause when using inverting commas, apostrophes for plural possession, and use of commas after fronted adverbials. So again, actually the children already know about commas, they already know about apostrophes. Now it's looking at the different ways in which we use them. So when we look at other punctuation after a reporting clause, here is some examples. So a reporting clause tells us who is speaking and who said what, and they can be found in both reported speech and direct speech. So here's an example. It's got the reporting clause at the end, he said, got the full stop, the comma, inverted commas and the capital letters. So this is where you would be expecting children now to understand the punctuation that they need within the inverted commas and what would come at the end, because quite often they're not, they will miss out the punctuation after the word cinema, and then sometimes miss out the punctuation at the end because they're so caught up on looking at the inverted commas. So it doesn't have to be a comma here, it could be an exclamation, it could be a question mark if the character is asking a question. And here is an example of a question from the Key Stage 2 SACS that is testing that specific element of the curriculum. Then the children will look at apostrophes for plural possession. So this is what I was talking about before. In year 2, you wouldn't touch upon this really. Obviously, you would do if there was a misconception that came up, then you would teach it. You wouldn't think, oh, we'll just wait until year 4 because this isn't actually part of our curriculum. You would go over it with maybe a child who was able to understand it, to avoid making giving them some wrong information or teaching them incorrectly. So here's some examples. So the members' votes were tallied and recorded. We voted for higher teachers' salaries. So because the salaries belong to the teachers, the apostrophe needs to come at the end, but the word teachers was already plural. So just have a look at those examples. And here's some more. So you can see the example on the left that we used when looking at year 2, and now when we look at plural possession, where the apostrophe would go after the S, wouldn't it? So the book belonging to the girl becomes the girl's book, but the book belonging to the girls, so because it's already plural, the apostrophe comes after the S. So have a think about what that would look like in these second two. The cat belonging to the boys and the bone belonging to the dogs. And if you want to know a bit more, just click on the link above. Here's the example from the SACS. Insert an apostrophe in the correct place in the sentence below. Okay, then we move on to commas after fronted adverbials. So there's another link if you want to know a bit more. So a fronted adverbial goes at the beginning of a sentence. It describes the verb in the sentence. It describes where, when, and how. So here's some examples. So we've got the fronted adverbial. Before the sun came up, comma, he ate his breakfast. All night long, comma, she danced. So there's some more examples. So we will be teaching children that the comma needs to come after the fronted adverbial. And some examples from the Year 6 paper. So insert 2 commas in the correct place in the passage below. Last Wednesday, comma, we performed a play at school, comma, I invited my parents to come and watch. Sorry, apologies there. It would be last Wednesday, comma, we performed at a school play, semicolon. but that is not taught in year 4, that comes later on. And then the second comma would come after the word stage. When I first went on stage, comma, I was so nervous, I nearly forgot my lines. Okay, so year 5, again, not that much new teaching. It's all about building on what the children already know. So we have brackets, dashes and commas to indicate parenthesis and the use of commas to clarify meaning. So parenthesis is a word, phrase or clause inserted as an explanation or afterthought. So there's a couple of examples and you can click to find out more. Here's an example from the Key Stage 2 stats. So inserting a pair of brackets in the correct place. So thinking again about parenthesis, it's an afterthought or an explanation. So there's the 2 examples. You, to put it mildly, are annoying. Yes, but I, as they say, am as free as a bird. So think about where would the brackets come in this question in the SATs. Using public transport such as buses and trains can reduce pollution. Yep, it would go around such as buses and trains, the brackets, because that is the explanation. And here's another example. So the bottom one is correct because the dashes used for parenthesis have added an explanation to the sentence. I will be running half a marathon, so they've explained what half a marathon is using the brackets next week. And here is an example of how it can be used within the children's writing. So all these different things I've been referring to the grammar test a lot, but actually you want them to use them within their writing just as much. So they need to have that basic understanding that they can apply to a grammar test to be able to apply it into their writing. Using commas to make the meaning clear. So in year 5, they continue to touch on commas, but actually it's to clarify meaning this time. So adding a comma can change the meaning of a sentence completely. So it's important that you put it in the right place. So here's an example. So let's eat Callum. This actually means we are going to eat Callum. But if we put a comma after the word eat, then it means that we are eating with Callum. So how do commas affect the meaning of these sentences? So here's a couple of questions year 5 children would be given. So as the sun shone orange, people looked desperately for shade. So as soon as you take away the comma, as the sun shone, orange people looked desperately for shade. By putting the comma in the wrong place and putting it after the word shone, it actually indicates that the people are orange rather than the orange sun. So have a look at the bottom one and think, how does it change the meaning? Okay, so in year 5, those are the only 2 new elements that are taught. So when we go to year 6, these are the new bits of punctuation that are taught. So although the punctuation, the children will already know about most of them, dashes, they'll know about hyphens, ellipsis. Even though it's taught in year 6, you'll probably actually find that children in year 2 and 3 are doing that. The same with bullet points as well. So, colons to introduce a list are taught. So a colon is a punctuation mark that can be used to introduce a list or to separate 2 independent but linked clauses. Colons are used to stress that both clauses in the sentence are closely linked and the second clause emphasizes, adds clarification or adds further detail to the first clause. So here's an example. He has given me 3 options to retake the exam, to accept the extra credit assignment, or to fail the class. So it introduces the list here and it explains the 3 options that have been given. When colons are used to introduce an item or series of items, the first word written after the colon does not need to be capitalized. So again, you need to be confident at knowing that to be able to teach the children correctly and to make sure that you address a misconception if a child puts a capital letter after the colon. A colon can be used to separate clauses within a sentence. So here's an example. A whale is not a fish, it is a warm-blooded animal. And in some cases, colons are used to introduce a quotation or direct speech. So for example, he offered the following advice: don't run too fast at the beginning of the long distance race. Now that is quite a technical thing for children to understand. It will still be taught in year 6, but actually that would be quite advanced for a child to be using that within their writing. So here's an example of a question in the Key Stage 2 SATs. And another example. And another example. Okay, so there's a video that you'll be able to click on. Okay, so next we move on to semicolons. So they are mainly used within a sentence to separate clauses. The clause must be on the same theme and not joined together with a conjunction. So the semicolon takes the place of a conjunction within the sentence. So you can see that it's replaced the word and here. So in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, we'd be looking at it was cold and the sun was shining. But then as the children are taught about semicolons, they'll understand how it can replace the conjunction. Here's another example. And you can have a little go here. Have a look at these and see if you can put the semicolon in the correct place. Then we're also taught semicolons within a list, because semicolons can be used to separate items within a list to help clarify internal groups. So here is some examples. And this is back to the question that we looked at in year 4. So the children should be able to insert the 2 commas from year 4, but then adding the semicolon would be in year 6. So it would go after the word school. Last Wednesday, comma, we performed a play at school, semicolon, I invited my parents to come and watch. So we've put the semicolon here. It could have replaced the conjunction and. Okay, next we look at dashes to mark the boundary between independent clauses. So we know what a colon can be used for, we know what a semicolon can be used for. Now looking at how you can add a dash to indicate parentheses within a sentence and to separate 2 independent clauses. So it explains there that it's most commonly used in informal writing. So they do a similar jobs to brackets and are useful for separating parts of a sentence which introduce information or new ideas or are not essential to understanding. So they replace commas, brackets, semicolons and colons, and they're usually less formal. So you wouldn't advise children to use them that much in their writing unless they were doing quite an informal piece. And also remember not to be confused with what a hyphen is as well. So a dash and a hyphen are separate things. So here's an example of a question. So it's asking the children to circle the dash which has been incorrectly added to each sentence below. So have a look at it. Can you find the incorrectly placed dashes? There we go. And here from the Year 6 test, it's asking you to insert one in the correct place. It was a very exciting lesson. We learned how parachutes work and designed one of our own. So where do you think that goes? Then children are taught about hyphens and how they are used to avoid ambiguity. So this is where children might become a bit confused by mixing up a dash and a hyphen. But a hyphen is shorter than a dash and it joins words together. So there are no spaces between a hyphen and the word. So here's an example, 25, and it wouldn't have a space after the Y or in front of the F. So when and where do we find one? We find them in numbers between 21 and 99. In the time, so when it's written as a noun. So I call the 10 o'clock to work. So we'd need to put the hyphen in there because 10 o'clock is acting as the noun in that sentence. When a person's age is written before a noun or instead of a noun, so I have a 12-year-old son. Names that are double-barreled, and a hyphen can be put between two places in a journey. So I call it the Manchester-Leeds train. It will also be used, a hyphen will also be used to create compound adjectives. So for example, cold-blooded, or informal phrases such as sing-song. And it will avoid awkward letter combinations, so de-escalated, so that it's not got the double E next to one another. So there's a little video to find out more. And just a little bit of explanation here about it. So it can completely change a sentence's meaning too. So the superstar player decided to re-sign his contract, and that means that the player is leaving the club because he's resigned it. But then in the second one, it means he's staying. So you need to be very careful in making sure they're used in the correct place. Otherwise, it will alter the meaning and create ambiguity. Lots of confusion. So which of the following uses a hyphen to avoid ambiguity? And explain your reasoning. So by this point, you're expecting that the children will be able to explain their answer properly. So explain why it uses a hyphen to avoid the reader becoming confused. When children are working at the expected standard by the end of Key Stage 2, they'll be making some successful uses of ellipses within their independent writing to help it flow and avoid repetition. And some children will be using it for dramatic effect as well, generally in story writing. So here's a little bit of an example of something you might do with the children. So looking at how the ellipsis could be used. So they can be used to create tension, adding a pause. They can be used to show that a sentence or a thought is trailing off. They can show a character is uncertain or is pausing in their speech, and they can show that words are missing from a sentence. So this question here is asking you to decide whether the example I was just wondering, Mike said, is A, B, C, D. So have a look at those ones at the bottom and decide which example you think they are. And the last thing that children are taught are bullet points. Now you'll probably find that by the time they get to year 6, they're actually confident with bullet points anyway, and it's not something that the teachers would generally be teaching explicitly. The children will be used to using them within, say, their non-chronological reports within their learning challenge throughout year groups. Okay, so just making sure that the children understand how they use to organise and structure writing. Okay, so if you need to go back at any point, maybe pause the video, or if there's something that you've come up against that maybe you're not quite as confident with, maybe partly because you don't actually work higher up school, then I would go back through and pause it and make sure that you are spending time to understand how the punctuation is used so that you can teach it correctly. So have a think now in the reflection, how confident are you with teaching punctuation and supporting children with their own work? Could you use your knowledge to be able to challenge children when writing? So would you be able to suggest that maybe they replace a conjunction with a semicolon? Would you be able to make sure that they've done that correctly? And would you be confident at addressing misconceptions? It's really important that even if you work further down school, you understand how these different elements are taught and when they are taught, so that you can challenge maybe your more able children within the class. Okay, thank you for watching. I hope you found that quite helpful, and I hope now you have a better understanding of the national curriculum and how actually a lot of the different elements of punctuation are taught in year groups that maybe you wouldn't think so. I also think it's quite interesting that, say, when children move to Key Stage 2, they're actually only taught an introduction to inverted commas. That's the only new punctuation that they learn in year 3, and it's all about the children going back and making sure that they're confident with the elements from Key Stage 1. So what we would ask you to do is we will send out the link to the form below so that you can fill it in, and any feedback that you have, any extra advice, support that you need, make sure that you reach out to somebody in your school. Okay, so thank you very much.